On Monday, March 16, 1987, a startling discovery by a couple walking across a bridge in southeastern Lincoln County begins an investigation that leads right back to the heart of Gaston County. The body of Robin Lynn Orr lying along a creek bank, apparently tossed off the Dutchman's Creek Bridge near Lowesville. Just a year earlier, Robin had been living with her sister, Linda, at her home in Virginia Beach. Robin was trying to make a break from her past, but the demons of addiction proved too strong.
Some people are just not strong enough to break that cycle, and she was one of them. But she really tried. But once you're in that lifestyle, it's really hard to get out of it.
The State Bureau of Investigation provided agents to help find Robin's killer. But it was decades later, as Detective Mark Stamey reviewed the case from scratch. A letter from an inmate provides a possible clue that could finally help solve this case.
In my opinion, and again, I'm not a psychologist, I'm just a detective. In my opinion, it almost sounded like this man was trying to confess, but nobody ever asked him the right question.
Join us as we shed light on the unsolved cases of the past. This is Gaston Unsolved. Robin Lynn Orr was born on November 2, 1959. She was one of 4 children, 2 brothers, Rex and Roddy, and a younger sister, Linda. They grew up together in Bessemer City. The father, Delmas, was an ambulance driver in World War II. Iva Jean was a homemaker and helped raise the 4 children. Linda said Robin watched out for her as her older sister, but also loved to play pranks as well.
She was a very lovely, lovely girl. She was always kind to me. She was a little bit mischievous, though. She wanted to play tricks on me. But she was my sister and my protector. She was older than me, and she always wanted to make sure that I was okay. If we would go to the lake, my parents had a lake house, and we would go there, and she would throw worms at me if we went worm hunting to go fishing.
Linda has fond memories of time spent with Robin and her father, especially in those summers.
Me and Robin loved him to death. He would take us to the mountains when Mama didn't want to go, and he had a 1952 Chevy truck. We'd take that up there, and that thing, I love that old truck. I'd love to have it now. And he would sing Conway Twitty songs and Loretta Lynn. He couldn't sing, but he'd sing it to us, and we still loved it,
The family attended the First Wesleyan Church in Bessemer City. While Linda said her faith has provided her strength throughout her life, Robin sought comfort elsewhere. Robin left home at 14, dropping out of school. She found love at a young age and moved to Florida, eventually giving birth to a son, Stephen. The relationship with Stephen's father wouldn't last long, and Robin returned to North Carolina, working in a local textile mill and relying on her mother to help with Stephen. Delmas Orr died in 1984, and by then, Robin's life had begun to unravel. Following an arrest and charges that could have landed her in prison for several years, Robin was instead given a second chance, rehab, and a chance to start over with Linda and her family in Virginia Beach. Robin worked at a hotel near her sister's house, and for a time, it seemed as though Robin would be able to put her past behind her. But years of addiction held a grip that was not easily broken.
She was just lost and needed someone to help her. I tried many times.
In the fall of 1986, Robin would return to Bessemer City, living with a cousin, Daryl. Just months later, she was dead. Lincoln County Sheriff Bill Beam started his career with the department 48 years ago. He was on duty working as a patrol lieutenant when a call came in on a Monday morning in March 1987. A couple out for a walk near Lowesville had noticed a body lying along a creek bank.
The old plank road was fairly remote,
In those days, although Lake Norman was here, it was fairly remote, and it was it was disturbing. She was very scantily dressed, hardly any clothing at all. There was a shoestring that was around her neck. You could pretty obviously see that, and it appeared at your first glance that she had been strangled to death and probably tossed over the bridge.
There was no purse or any ID on the woman, so part of the initial investigation was trying to identify just who this person was and where she had come from. Robin had several distinctive tattoos, and after news reports aired that evening, the very next day, Robin was identified as the victim. The Lincoln County Sheriff's Office reached out to the State Bureau of Investigation, which brought in several agents from across the region to help work the case. Nearly right away, investigators knew they were looking for a second crime scene, the place where Robin was actually killed.
It makes it a lot more difficult when you, because the amount of evidence that you're able to collect is best at the location where the homicide occurred.
Lieutenant Beam, Special Agent Don Allen, and numerous other state and local detectives spent weeks in Robin's hometown of Bessemer City, interviewing friends, neighbors, and anyone they could find that knew Robin. Beam said they had several good suspects initially, but could never develop anything conclusive. Authorities broadened their search, considering the possibility that Robin's murderer may have been a truck driver or a multi-state serial killer.
There is that possibility that this could have been a case that wasn't a singular case. It could have been someone that was involved in serial murders. Of course, that was considered at the time and is still being considered by the Lincoln County Sheriff's Department.
That theory was amplified when a friend of Robin's, Kimmy Massengale, was found murdered in Gastonia in early August of that same year. Her case also remains unsolved. Regardless of the theories about the motive and the killer, solving the case continued to prove elusive.
It was a long process that we investigated heavily for a number of years.
Despite the long hours, the multiple agencies, and all the manpower devoted to finding Robin's killer, the leads began to dry up, and the case would go cold. Mark Stamey worked for the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office for more than a decade, beginning in the 1980s. After a few years away, he returned to the office in 2007, taking over as a detective in charge of sex crime investigations. It wasn't long before Stamey was asked to re-examine Robin Orr's case, now more than 20 years after she was killed. Of benefit, a DNA sample was obtained back in 1987. It was sent to the Combined DNA Index System, better known as CODIS.
I first checked with the state crime lab and found out that they had actually submitted or retrieved a DNA sample during her autopsy. And that was one of the first or near the first few of the cases that was put into the CODIS system.
Stamey reviewed the interviews done by SBI agents and Lincoln County Sheriff's deputies and wanted to use modern technology to test some key suspects. Among those was Robin's ex-husband, Doug Bush. Stamey quickly discovered that Bush had died years before, but DNA gathered from Bush's mother could still aid the investigation. No match. Undeterred, Stamey had contacted one of the last people to see Robin alive, an older man who had been seeking to have a relationship with Robin in the weeks before she was killed. The pair dined at a Gastonia Waffle House, detectives believe, just hours before Robin died. Amazingly, more than 2 decades later, the man still remembered what they'd had to eat on March 15, 1987. His description matched some of the contents in Robin's stomach discovered during the autopsy. The man remained heartbroken over Robin's killing and agreed to provide a DNA sample.
His anguish was genuine.
That DNA sample would eliminate him as a suspect, too. Stamey's work on the case attracted media attention, with newspapers in both Gaston and Lincoln counties picking up the story in 2010. New tips came in. A witness who said Robin may have last been seen getting into a truck with a man named Jimmy or James. But even with the benefit of modern technology and new tips in the case, Stamey continued to hit dead ends as well, despite a dogged pursuit to find Robin's killer. He even went as far to track down Robin's old car, a black Thunderbird, from a local scrapyard. Stamey said it had been through so many different owners after Robin that there was nothing new that could be learned from re-examining the vehicle. Years after he took over the case, a letter from an inmate told of a deathbed confession that could finally bring closure to the case. When Robin returned to Bessemer City in the fall of 1986, one of the people she would spend time with was a cousin, Gary Goldman Cleveland Carver. Carver was one of the many people interviewed initially by police and would tell detectives years later that Robin's ex-husband was the one who killed her. Carver was imprisoned in 1990, sentenced to 21 years following a wild string of robberies in northwestern Gaston County the previous year. By early 1994, Carver was in the medical unit at the Piedmont Correctional Institution in Salisbury and knew he was dying.
He said that just before he died, they were out on the exercise yard, and Mr. Carver told him that, look, I have something I have to get off my chest. He said, I'm getting ready to die. He said, I killed Robin Orr. Nobody else did. Doug Bush did not. I killed her.
Stamey traveled to the prison to meet with Carver's former cellmate to have him recount the confession once again. Hoping to perhaps finally close this case, Stamey began looking into having Carver's body exhumed for DNA testing, but that would prove to be yet another dead end. Carver had been cremated.
I wish there was more I could do, or if there's some other tips, I would love it. I still think about that case, even when I'm to the point that I'm at now with it as far as Mr. Carver. I still think about it. Have I missed something? Is there anything else I can do?
Stamey said the key could rest with anyone who may have seen Robin the night of March 15th, 1987, just before she was killed, or perhaps along the Old Plank Road Bridge late that night or very early the next morning when her body was thrown down to the creek below. Many of those who loved Robin are now gone. Her mother in 1990, of a broken heart, Robin's sister Linda said. Robin's brother Rex in 2016, her son Stephen, who died of cancer 4 years ago.
He really suffered. Stephen did. This young man suffered heartache after heartache after heartache.
It's now left to Linda to keep Robin's memory alive.
It would be wonderful if she was different and I would still have her as my sister here. Because I miss not having a sister. I've cried many times, prayed many times that they would find out. But, deep down, it's like, what if it's someone that I know?
Next time on Gaston Unsolved. A murder that goes back to the mid-60s.
It's unlikely that the assailant is still alive.
The oldest cold case for the Gaston County Police Department gets a fresh look.
If we're able to clear this, it'll be something that we'll be able to go to the family and say, this is who killed your grandfather or your great-grandfather, and we'll give the family some closure.
Is there still hope to find out who killed Livingston Bumgarner?